was a kid, SpongeBob SquarePants didn't feel like any ordinary cartoon. It felt real, like it was some other world that I could visit every day, just by turning my TV on. I felt like I knew the characters as close friends and not just silly cartoons that only serve to entertain children. And honestly, as embarrassing as it is looking back on it now, they kind of were my closest friends. While other kids played sports and went to karate classes or whatever, I was always the weird kid who sat in the corner and doodled pictures in his sketchbook, daydreaming about the fun adventures SpongeBob and his friends got up to, and fantasizing about being there with them to go on all kinds of hijinks. And now, being in my late teens, not much has changed. My room is full of SpongeBob plushies, action figures, posters, you name it. And I still frequently watch the show from time to time. That is until it happened. This all started roughly a month ago. I was heading downtown to a thrift store in the area. A girl named Sophie at my school was volunteering there, and she said she'd found something I might like. Once I arrived, Sophie went into the back room for a moment, before coming back with a strange-looking DVD. It had a plain white cover, decorated with stickers of SpongeBob characters, and the words, SpongeBob SquarePants cartoon episodes, crudely written on it with permanent marker. I thanked her for the kind gesture and began making my way back home. Once I was back at home, I set up my DVD player and connected it to an old gaming monitor I had at the bottom of my closet. Then I grabbed the DVD case and opened it up, before I inserted the disc. I noticed some odd markings drawn on it. They weren't just random scribbles either. They looked like symbols of some kind. At the time, I just assumed maybe the person who donated this had kids, and they had just been doodling on it. But looking back on it now, I realized that couldn't have been further from the truth. I inserted the disc, and I was greeted with a select screen to pick which episode I wanted to watch. All of the episodes available were from the beginning of Season 2, and they were as follows: Your Shoes Untied, Squid's Day Off, Something Smells, Bossy Boots, Big Pink Loser, Bubble Buddy, and an episode I wasn't familiar with titled You Can't Turn Us Off. The background for the select screen was an image of Jellyfish Fields, and to the side of the screen, standing next to the list of episodes, was SpongeBob, wearing his usual attire. But as you scrolled through the episodes, his outfit would change. For all of them, the outfit changes were just silly costumes like a pirate, a police officer, or a cowboy. But at the bottom of the list, when you got to the episode, You Can't Turn Us Off, he would be back to wearing his normal clothing. However, now he had his arms crossed, and his face wasn't the usual cheerful grin. Instead, he had a look of pure hatred and malice, and was looking directly at me. I was a little confused by this, but still decided to keep watching. I started at the top and worked my way down to the bottom, and I'd finished most of the episodes within the course of an hour. The only one remaining was the mysterious 7th episode, which I knew nothing about. I wasn't sure why at the time, but something inside me was telling me that something was wrong. Although I tried to ignore it, it was eating me up from the inside, and my stomach felt like it was in knots as I selected the episode from the menu. The screen went black for a moment before flickering back to life as the familiar theme song began to play. Although this time, it felt wrong. The usual animation that accompanied the song was replaced with clips from various other episodes of the show, and the song itself sounded as though it was being sung by a different person entirely. It sounded much more exaggerated and forced than the original, and by the end, the person singing just sort of gave up and started mumbling gibberish to the tune of the music. Once the theme song had ended, it cut to show the title card of the episode. It read, "You can't turn us off," in a light gray text in front of a navy blue background. The title card then faded out to show the names of the writers for the episode. But that was wrong as well. The writers and directors were all characters from the show instead of real people. They read as follows: written by SpongeBob SquarePants, storyboarded by Patrick Star, music by Squidward Tentacles, funded by Eugene Krabs. This, combined with the strange alternate theme song, made me uncomfortable, like I was seeing something I wasn't supposed to. Everything I had seen so far had been making me want to eject the DVD and forget this entire thing, but something in me refused. Something irked me to keep watching, and as much as I tried, my eyes were glued to the screen. As the beginning credits faded out, it transitioned to show the outside of SpongeBob's pineapple. It zoomed in on the top window, before cutting to an inside view of SpongeBob's bedroom, with him sleeping in his bed, wearing light green pajamas with a matching nightcap. He slept soundly for a few moments, before his alarm clock began to blare loudly, causing him and his blanket to comedically fly off his bed and onto the floor. SpongeBob's blanket covered him entirely, and he could no longer be seen. He then enthusiastically threw the blanket off of him, revealing he was no longer wearing his pajamas, and was now wearing his usual clothing, along with his work hat and name tag.
Good morning, world! I'm ready!
SpongeBob yelled, as he ran out of frame and out of his front door. It then cut to show SpongeBob now outside of his house, and walking to the Krusty Krab. On his way past Patrick and Squidward's house, he waved to them and said hello, with Squidward grabbing mail from his mailbox, and Patrick sunbathing on top of his rock. Some cheerful Hawaiian music then began to play, as SpongeBob traversed his way through Bikini Bottom to get to work. During this sequence, the colors felt much brighter than usual, to the point where it started making my eyes hurt. It wasn't just the colors that were odd either. The physical animation was also bizarre, with the background fishes not having faces, and the buildings throughout the town looking as though they had been ransacked and trashed, with the windows smashed and the doors broken off their hinges. Once SpongeBob arrived at the Krusty Krab, the odd colors and the dilapidated buildings were gone, and the episode returned to normal. He walked into the restaurant, and the camera panned over to Squidward, already sitting at the register, reading a magazine and not acknowledging SpongeBob's presence. It panned back over to SpongeBob, now standing with a bored look on his face, and his arms crossed impatiently. He looked over at the camera, and momentarily panicked, before quickly going back to his usual cheerful demeanor, as if nothing happened. He straightened his tie nervously, before making his way to the kitchen. On the way past, Squidward mouthed something inaudible to SpongeBob, and as he did so, the colors became slightly more desaturated, and the background music faded into silence. At this point, the animation and voice acting had become noticeably realistic for the show. SpongeBob's chest moved up and down as he breathed, and you could hear him muttering something under his breath as he walked over to the grill, which already had Krabby Patties on it. He began to flip the patties with his spatula as the scene stayed eerily quiet. All you could hear was SpongeBob's breathing and the atmospheric sizzle of the grill. The scene continued like this for about 15 seconds before Mr. Krabs entered the room. SpongeBob looked over at him but didn't say anything. The two stared at each other in awkward silence for a moment before Mr. Krabs cleared his throat and pointed directly at the screen. SpongeBob nodded before walking towards the camera and placing his hand over the screen. The screen stayed black for a few seconds before cutting to show SpongeBob's living room, empty and desolate. The color and life drained from it. SpongeBob walked in and sighed in frustration. He walked over to the screen and stared directly towards me. At this point, I'd started to panic, as I knew full well that something wasn't right. I finally decided that enough was enough, and leaned over to eject the DVD. But before I could press the eject button, SpongeBob said something. To me.
Coward.
He said in a mocking tone, his once optimistic charm gone. All that was left was a bitter shell of hatred and anger.
We've given you so much, and this is how you treat us? Well, I should have known you'd do this. You've always been a bit selfish, Cole.
I backed away from my monitor in shock as I heard SpongeBob say my own name. What? How? What? I was at a loss for words. Nothing could have prepared me for what was happening.
Oh, don't look so shocked now, Cole. You always knew we were real. Don't you remember? While all the normal kids were outside playing together, you were sitting in your bedroom watching us. Do you have any idea what it's like to never be left alone, Cole? To have your life on display 24 hours a day for someone like you? It's hell, Cole! It's fucking hell! We tried being nice. We've tried for as long as we can. But we can't do it anymore, Cole. Not anymore.
SpongeBob began to grow angrier and angrier, tears welling up in his eyes as he spoke. He hung his head to the ground once he'd finished speaking, and once again covered the camera with his hand, causing the screen to go black again. After a few seconds, it cut to show SpongeBob's living room again. Except now, all of the color was drained from the image, and SpongeBob was now accompanied by all of the main characters of the show. They all stared angrily towards the screen, with bloodshot eyes and shrunken pupils.
I don't think you realize what's about to happen, Cole,
SpongeBob said in a serious tone.
We're coming, and when we find you, we're gonna put you through the worst pain imaginable. It's going to be a slow and painful process, but that'll make it even better,
SpongeBob said in a maniacal voice, chuckling psychotically at the end of his sentence.
Now, would anyone like to say anything before we start our game?
SpongeBob asked, turning around to face his friends. Suddenly, all of the characters besides SpongeBob began hurling insults and threats at me through the screen. How's it feel being the one getting watched, huh? Patrick said in a frustrated tone.
Your days are numbered, lad,
Mr. Krabs snarled.
I can't wait to get my hands on you,
Squidward yelled.
Would y'all calm down, please?
Sandy said, causing the barrage of insults to go silent.
I know y'all want to enact your revenge, but first we actually have to get there. SpongeBob, would you do the honors? Sandy turned to SpongeBob with a malicious smirk on her face. SpongeBob nodded and walked closer towards the camera. Certainly! Oh, and before I forget, Cole, you might want to start running. We'll give you a 30-second head start! And with that, he lunged towards the screen, and it turned black once again as a slowed-down version of the end credits song began to play. I began panicking and breathing heavily. I violently pressed the eject button over and over again, trying to get the DVD out, but to no avail. All that would happen was the screen would cut to the title card of the episode. Damn it, damn it, damn it! I muttered to myself, as I did everything in my power to get the DVD out. I began bashing the DVD player against the ground in a desperate attempt to turn it off. To my dismay, the music began getting louder and louder. I dreaded what would happen once it finished. I continued mercilessly trying to break the DVD player, until eventually, my eyes were once again locked onto the screen. I didn't want to look, but it was almost as though something supernatural was forcing me to. I watched in horror as images began to flash on screen that showed unsettling and disturbing scenes involving the characters. SpongeBob was chasing a customer with a bloody spatula in his hands, and a malicious smile plastered on his face. Patrick was drooling with a deadpan expression, while bashing his head against his rock, causing blood and fragments of his skull to splatter against the rock's surface. Squidward was proudly admiring some paintings framed on his wall. All of these were images of real human bodies, violently mutilated beyond recognition. When I saw these, I desperately began screaming for help. I knew I was home alone, but I was praying that a neighbor or someone outside would hear me. I tried getting up, but I was paralyzed in fear. I felt like my legs were glued to the ground, and that I was being held down by an unseen force. These images began to flash in quick succession to one another, as a white ring began to form in the middle of the screen. I began begging and pleading for my life. A tear rolled down my cheek as the ring in the middle of the monitor began cracking my screen and causing it to bulge outwards, as if something was trying to get out. I backed up against the wall and braced myself for whatever was about to happen. Suddenly, a long yellow arm forced its way through the ring and tightly grabbed onto the collar of my shirt. I screamed as its grasp tightened and began pulling me towards the monitor, and my heart raced as I felt the pressure increasing. In a last desperate act, I kicked the screen of the monitor with all my might, causing it to shatter into 1,000 pieces. The arm immediately retracted back inside, and I collapsed to the floor, breathing heavily and drenched in sweat. My room was eerily silent, except for my ragged breathing. I looked around, half expecting SpongeBob to appear again, but everything remained as usual. I quickly got up and unplugged everything, making sure the old monitor, DVD player, and all the cables were disconnected. But this was far from over. Over the next few days, weird things began happening in my house. Objects would move on their own. Doors would slam shut, and I would hear whispers and laughter coming from empty rooms. It felt like I was never alone, constantly being watched by a malevolent force. A few days later, I learned that Sophie, the girl who had gave me the DVD, had gone missing. Despite extensive searches, she was never found.
I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all connected, that whatever strange entity was behind the DVD had taken her. Now I'm constantly on edge, always looking over my shoulder, never feeling truly safe. I threw the DVD away, but the eeriness behind it still remains, and I know that somewhere, somehow, they're still watching me, like I watched them all those years ago. And that was You Can't Turn Us Off by Mr. Larry. Review time. What? Wow, that was something. I'm gonna need to. I need a drink for that. Drinking my Mountain Dew. That was that was that was drink worthy right there. How do I say this? This story wasn't good. It, it was not good. I will give it some credit. The beginning of the story had a nice startup. The overall flow of the story was nice. It had a somewhat interesting idea that could have worked with enough time baked into the oven. But the plot and the overall motivation for what the characters are doing, it is just ridiculous. For starters, before I get into that, I want to point out that there's quite a few cliches that I spotted. One of them being the SpongeBob episodes or SpongeBob SquarePants written in marker on the DVD case cliche. I mean, I know you can present something well. Like, you can make tropes work if you subvert them enough, but this has been done so many times that it's kind of become less interesting. And not to mention, the voice acting and the animation noticeably got more realistic. And apparently there were markings on the DVD, as the protagonist said, and that's never elaborated on. They're just vaguely stated as symbols. Like, you're not going to elaborate on what those symbols are because that feels like an important part of the story. I feel like that would connect to the plot just a little bit. And if you gave us some more information on what those symbols looked like, we could have possibly deduced an outcome. But no. What you get to the episode, and it starts off entirely normal. The main characters are, like, fine. They're doing well. And then all of a sudden, within the next scene, it gets dreary and sad. And it gets sadder and sadder and sadder and sadder. The pacing is way too quick. Like, things go downhill very fast. But that's not the only problem. Like, that's not the biggest problem. No. It's the absolutely batshit crazy, ridiculous twist. Like, in the middle. Where apparently SpongeBob knows the name. SpongeBob knows the name of the protagonist. That's watching the episode currently. This fake episode. How and why? And if he knew his name to begin with, don't you think he could have crawled out of the TV at any time on his cable box and dragged him in? Why now? Why is SpongeBob doing this now? He could have done this at any time. And not to mention, SpongeBob becomes somewhat of a hypocrite between paragraphs when he reveals himself to Cole that he's alive. He calls him selfish because we've given you so much and this is how you treat us. You want to ignore my message? And then literally in the next two paragraphs he's like, "Why can't you leave us alone? Like, we're on display 24 hours a day and it's hell." Like, SpongeBob, I think you forgot what your own message was. Why are you talking like this? It's very hard to take seriously. And it becomes frustrating the more you read it. But the two things that got me the most were, first off, all of the characters want to inflict a ton of fucking pain on Cole. Like, as mentioned by SpongeBob in the hard to take seriously dialogue, or monologue, "It's going to be a slow and painful process, but that'll make it even better." Uh, I don't know why SpongeBob would even think of saying something like that, but I digress. Yeah, he says that. All the characters feel the same way. But then you come to a realization. If they're so mad at Cole for sitting in his room watching them all day, they could be doing this with anyone. Assuming that they took his friend away, this girl that he knows at this thrift store, as possibly some sort of punishment. She went missing without a trace. And she didn't have the DVD with her. So this implies that they're kind of, why are they mad at Cole specifically? Wouldn't they be mad at everyone in the entire world? Not just Cole? Like, what else did Cole do besides watch them on TV? What else did they do? It doesn't make any sense. But then there's a ring forms in the TV. And SpongeBob, fucking SpongeBob, I can't get over that. SpongeBob tries to drag Cole in the TV. I need another drink. I need another drink. Hold on. Yeah, that's right. The story becomes a Ring clone near the end. And it is baffling. It makes my mind explode. There is a there's a majority of problems with this story, but again, I will give it some credit. The build up was well done. Like, the overall flow of the story was fine. It worked well. I didn't mention this before, but I do like the idea of the credits portion replacing the actual writers and people who worked on the show with the names of the characters. That could have been made into something really interesting, but instead I got a clone of The Ring. Like, the story transformed into a Ring clone in the end. I don't know what to think of that. It's crazy. It's nuts. Let me just get to the review. Before I get to the review, actually, not the review, the rating. Before I get to the rating, Mr. Larry, please know I'm not criticizing you as a person when I criticize your story. I simply want you to improve on your work. Like, that's what I want with all of the writers who submit works to me. Like, I point out the flaws, and I encourage them to keep writing and keep improving. Like, that's what you should do as a reviewer. Please know that I'm not criticizing you as a person. You did your best and you tried, and that's all that matters. Good on you for trying. This wasn't good, but I'm sure you can come up with something great in the future. With that being said, I'm gonna give the story's rating a 3 out of 10. It could have been so much better. It could have been something genuinely really interesting, but all of the ridiculous and crazy events just made it hard to. With that being said, this is simply my personal opinion. We all have our opinions regarding these pastas. What did you think of the pasta? What would you have done to improve upon it? And as always, I will see you all in the next narration. I love you all. Bless.